It was September 10th, 2005, at the Brest border crossing between Poland and Belarus. By mid-morning, the scene was already tense. More than 20 buses lined up, their engines idling, passengers staring out the windows with tired eyes. The crowd was growing by the hour, drivers honking in frustration, families pacing the roadside with their bags, border guards watching silently. But the story unfolding here wasn't just about delays at a checkpoint. In recent days, Poland had been making its presence felt far beyond its borders. No longer content to be just another name on the map, Warsaw was raising its voice, and the world was listening. Leaders across Europe were whispering the same thing. Support for the eastern flank, especially Poland, was no longer optional. It was essential. The turning point came after the massive Zapad military exercises, which heightened tensions across the region. In response, Poland took a decisive step. It closed its border crossing with Belarus. Overnight, thousands of vehicles and people were stranded at checkpoints. The lines of cars and buses were dramatic, but they were only the surface of something much bigger. Because the real blow didn't land in Belarus or even in Poland. It landed thousands of miles away in Beijing. With a single political decision, Poland had severed China's most important trade artery into Europe. That corridor, worth an estimated $25 billion every year, was the lifeline of Beijing's Grand Belt and Road Initiative. For years, China had poured billions into rail infrastructure, determined to build a faster, cheaper alternative to traditional shipping lanes. Rail was the perfect middle ground, weeks quicker than container ships, far more affordable than cargo planes. Through this network, Europe was flooded with electronics, machinery, car parts, and endless consumer goods. And at the heart of this system lay a single choke point, the Małaszewicze terminal in eastern Poland. This was no ordinary border station. It was a sprawling logistics hub where Asia's railways met Europe's. Every day, thousands of containers switched tracks here, transforming raw speed into smooth delivery. Now, with that hub shut down, the whole system shuttered. In mid-September 2025, Poland made a bold move that sent shockwaves through Europe and Asia. Practically overnight, Warsaw slammed shut one of the most important trade gates between East and West, the Małaszewicze terminal. The decision also sealed off key railway crossings like Kuźnica Hrodna, Siemianówka Swislak, and Tiraspol Brest. The effect was immediate. A massive stream of cargo, worth around 25 billion euros each year, was suddenly stuck on the wrong side of the border. Belarusian railway crews reported that the system didn't just slow down, it froze. Whole warehouses and train stations in Belarus began to fill up with thousands of stranded containers. For China, this wasn't just a shipping headache or some temporary financial bump. This was a direct hit on its prized Belt and Road project, the global trade network it had spent years promoting as a symbol of its rising power. One choke point in Poland had managed to strike at the very heart of that plan. The political fallout came quickly. Within days, China's diplomats were on the move. On September 15th to 16th, Poland's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, sat down with Wang Yi, Beijing's top diplomat. Wang didn't mince words. He pressed hard, insisting that Poland reopen the border without delay. But Warsaw wasn't backing down. Sikorski avoided giving any timeline and instead pointed straight to Poland's national security concerns. It was a striking moment. A European Union country standing firm against pressure from the world's second-largest economy. This wasn't the Poland of old. This was a Poland and a Europe acting with new confidence. And Poland had a bigger game in mind. The blocked trade route wasn't just about customs and cargo. It was leverage, a powerful bargaining chip worth billions. By holding up China's rail lifeline, Warsaw was pushing Beijing to rethink its stance on the war in Ukraine. Polish leaders weren't subtle about it either. Just days later, on September 15th, Sikorski went public with a statement that sounded less like diplomacy and more like a direct challenge. He called on China to use its influence over Russia to help end the war in Ukraine. At the same time, Warsaw turned its attention to Belarus, a close ally of both Moscow and Beijing. Poland demanded that China rein in Minsk, which had been carrying out so-called hybrid attacks on the border. These weren't military assaults, but something more insidious. the deliberate funneling of irregular migrants toward Poland in an attempt to destabilize the region. While China scrambled to get Poland to reverse course, the rest of Europe was paying close attention. Brussels, Berlin, and Paris understood exactly what was unfolding. Poland wasn't just playing defense, it was reshaping the balance of power inside the European Union itself. For years, many EU capitals had tiptoed around Beijing, careful not to upset trade ties. Now, Poland was breaking that pattern and showing that Europe didn't have to treat China as untouchable. Germany, in particular, found itself in an awkward spot. Its economy relies heavily on exports to China, and the rail route through Poland is a vital artery for German manufacturers. But even as German business leaders worried about delayed shipments and rising costs, Berlin couldn't openly criticize Warsaw. Not when the war in Ukraine was still raging on its doorstep. Poland's tough stance gave it new credibility, and that meant even the EU's biggest players had to tread carefully. Across the Atlantic, Washington was quietly cheering. For the United States, Poland's move looked like a masterstroke. It hit China where it hurt, and it put pressure on Moscow without firing a single shot. American officials signaled support behind the scenes, hinting that Poland's gamble fit neatly into Washington's broader strategy of containing both Russia and China. Meanwhile, in Beijing, frustration began to mount. Chinese companies complained about goods piling up, European clients threatened to cancel orders, and investors started asking uncomfortable questions. For China's leadership, the situation was doubly painful. It showed that a single European country, not even one of the biggest, had the power to disrupt a flagship project that Beijing had spent years marketing as unstoppable. And then there was Belarus. The small but strategically placed country suddenly found itself at the center of the storm. Its rail yards were overflowing, its workers overwhelmed, and its government caught between two giants: China, which wanted the trains moving again, and Russia, which had no interest in giving Poland a win. Minsk tried to use the chaos to its advantage, continuing its pressure campaign on Poland's border with waves of migrants. But the plan backfired. Instead of weakening Warsaw, it only gave Poland more evidence to wave in front of China. Your ally is the one escalating tensions, not us. As the days passed, it became clear that Poland wasn't just blocking a railway, it was redrawing the map of European diplomacy. China suddenly found itself trapped in one of the toughest diplomatic corners of its modern history. For years, Beijing had carefully walked a tightrope in the Ukraine war, claiming neutrality, criticizing the West, and quietly slipping Moscow the economic and technological lifelines it needed. But now, Poland had yanked away that balancing act. Warsaw forced Beijing to face the very question it had tried to avoid. Would China lean toward the European Union, its biggest trading partner and gateway to global markets, or would it double down on its no-limits friendship with Russia? It wasn't just a political puzzle, it was a bill coming due, and the costs were piling up in every direction: social, economic, and geopolitical. The border closures caught ordinary people by surprise. Announced in the middle of the night, they left families, workers, and travelers stranded at crossings that just hours before had been open. At daybreak, the sight was heartbreaking. At Brest-Tiraspol, Semyonovka, and Kuznetsa, endless lines of cars and buses stretched for miles. Official tallies put the number at nearly 1,700 cars and 65 buses stuck between the two countries. But those figures didn't tell the whole story. Tens of thousands more were still on the highways. Many turned back before even reaching the frontier. Belarusian security forces set up roadblocks, forcing convoys to retreat. But retreat to what? For many, there was no backup plan. Jobs, families, and future opportunities were on the other side of that steel fence. Parents held passports and luggage in one hand, their children's hands in the other, staring at silent guards who gave no answers. This wasn't just a human drama, it was a logistical nightmare. In 2024, the trade flowing along this rail corridor had grown by over 10%, with goods worth more than 25 billion euros rolling through. The route had been Europe's workaround to slow ocean shipping and sky-high air freight prices. For e-commerce giants like Temu, Shein, and Alibaba, it was the artery that kept the promise of fast delivery alive. Now, with Poland shutting the gate, that artery was clogged. Assembly lines in Europe slowed as parts failed to arrive. Warehouses in Belarus and Western China overflowed with unshipped goods. Contracts were scrapped, shipments canceled, and companies faced massive penalty fees, billions of yuan vanishing into the air. But the financial losses were only the beginning. What stung the most was trust. For years, Chinese goods carried the reputation of being fast, cheap, and reliable. Now, importers in Europe were asking a new question. What if Poland wakes up tomorrow and does this again? Will I wait weeks for my order? Months? That seed of doubt was poisonous in global trade. And for Beijing, the danger was bigger than missed profits. The Chinese Communist Party's power at home has always rested on an unwritten deal with its citizens: steady growth in exchange for loyalty. As long as lives improved year after year, people accepted the system. But if that promise breaks, if jobs disappear, if factories cut hours, if families feel less secure, the party's authority could crack. Economic pain can turn into social unrest, and unrest is what the leadership fears most. Now picture the ripple effects deep inside China. In the sprawling industrial zones of Chongqing, where factories churn day and night, the slowdown begins quietly. First, management trims overtime hours. Then bonuses vanish. Eventually, entire shifts are cut. If the disruption lingers, pink slips follow. Suddenly, millions of workers face shrinking paychecks and rising uncertainty. For families who rely on every yuan, that's not just an economic hiccup. It's a social earthquake. The frustration of jobless workers, especially in China's western provinces, could ignite protests that spread like wildfire. Beijing dreads this scenario more than anything, because if anger spills from the factory floors into the streets, it doesn't just threaten the economy, it threatens the survival of the Communist Party itself. And all of this, ironically, began with a single decision taken thousands of miles away in Poland. But the crisis didn't only slam into China. Poland itself felt the tremors. PKP Cargo, the state-run rail operator, initially downplayed the problem, saying delays were manageable. Still, it quietly admitted that if the blockade dragged on, trade flows might reroute through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and Turkey. The bitter irony? Just a week before Warsaw closed the border, it had proudly launched the very first Warsaw-China freight train, showcasing its ambition to be the beating heart of Europe's logistics link with Asia. In a matter of days, that ribbon-cutting dream was shelved by Warsaw's own hand. The fallout reached beyond symbolism. Artur Kalisiak, a leading voice at the Polish Transport Association, painted the full scale of the disruption. The complete closure of the border is devastating not only for transport, but for the entire economy. Nearly 10,000 Belarusian drivers were left stranded, some unable to return to Poland for work, others unable to get back to Belarus. Perishable cargo like food and medicine sat idle at borders, at risk of spoiling. Yes, goods could theoretically detour through Lithuania or Latvia, but those paths came with higher costs and longer transit times. And even those detours weren't guaranteed to remain open. In other words, Poland had pressed a button and instantly shown just how fragile the entire east-west supply chain really was. But Warsaw's move wasn't random. It carried 3 deliberate messages, aimed not only at Beijing but at the world. The first message: Europe is done pretending that trade can be separated from politics. For decades, the rule was simple: business comes first, politics comes later. But Poland tore up that rulebook. Warsaw's stance is blunt. If Chinese profits in Europe end up fueling Russia's aggression, that trade is illegitimate. The new doctrine says stability and security come before profit. Put plainly, if our borders are threatened, your trains stop. For the first time, Europe's security and trade have been welded together in a way no one can ignore. The second message goes straight to China's partnership with Moscow. For years, Beijing insisted it was a bystander in the Ukraine war, even as it quietly supplied Russia with microchips, industrial gear, and investment lifelines that kept the war machine humming. Poland's response is cutting. This isn't neutrality, it's complicity, and complicity comes with a bill. By targeting China's trade routes, Warsaw has turned Beijing's relationship with Moscow into a concrete liability. This isn't just diplomatic rhetoric, it's economic punishment. China is now learning firsthand how its choices in Moscow echo all the way to European markets.
If you've made it this far into the video, it means you're enjoying what we do here at Euro Bulletin. Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more updates and insights from Europe and its partners. Let's dive in more into the subject.
The third message is about Poland itself. No longer the quiet frontier state on Europe's edge, Warsaw has thrust itself into the center of the continent's strategic map. The closure of the border wasn't only about stopping trains, it was about announcing Poland's new role, from geopolitical periphery to geopolitical core. With one bold stroke, Poland forced Europe and China alike to see it not as a transit country, but as a decisive player shaping the continent's future. Poland hasn't just pushed back against outside pressure, it has stepped into a new role as a regional leader. While Berlin hesitated and Brussels worried about consensus, Warsaw acted decisively. It shut the border, stared down China, and coordinated closely with its allies. This boldness leaves Europe with a striking question: who really guards the eastern gates of the continent? For decades, people assumed the answer was the old power centers: Brussels, Paris, or Berlin. But with one move, Poland has shifted that perception. The states on Europe's eastern flank are no longer just a buffer zone between East and West. They are decision makers, capable of reshaping the direction of European security and policy. The fallout of this crisis has rippled through international relations in ways that can't be reversed. Warsaw and Beijing will never look at each other the same again. To China, Poland is no longer just another EU partner. It's now seen as hostile and unreliable, a country willing to sabotage China's prized Belt and Road ambitions. For Poland, the view of China has hardened just as sharply. Beijing is no longer a neutral trading partner. It's a power entangled in Russia's war, a power willing to put Europe's stability at risk. This mutual distrust sets the stage for a colder, more transactional relationship. Every negotiation will carry an undertone of suspicion. Every agreement will come with tougher bargaining. And Poland, aware of its newfound leverage, is unlikely to waste the advantage. But the stakes go beyond Warsaw and Beijing. The so-called no-limits friendship between Moscow and Beijing is being tested like never before. For the first time, China is paying a direct economic price for standing by Russia. That price isn't abstract. It's lost revenue, disrupted trade, and even the risk of domestic unrest. Publicly, Beijing won't abandon Moscow. It can't. It has invested too much in the partnership. But behind closed doors, pressure is building. Chinese diplomats will quietly demand that Russia take steps to stabilize the region, because every day of war now damages China's trade routes and threatens its internal stability. The alliance that once looked unshakable is beginning to show cracks. And then there's Belarus. President Alexander Lukashenko's tactics, pushing migrants toward the Polish border and stoking instability, were meant to strengthen his hand. Instead, they've weakened him. To Beijing, Belarus now looks less like a partner and more like a liability, a pawn who disrupts the game rather than advances it. For a country desperate to be seen as indispensable, that's a dangerous downgrade. In this ruthless geopolitical chess match, the unexpected winners so far are Poland and Ukraine. Poland has proven that even a mid-sized European state can rewrite the rules, using geography and strategy to punch far above its weight. Ukraine, meanwhile, benefits from Warsaw's pressure campaign, which forces Beijing to reconsider just how costly it is to back Putin's war. Of course, these moves have come at a human cost. The thousands of families stranded at the border, stuck in endless lines of buses and cars, turned back from blocked crossings, left in limbo between two worlds, are the most tragic face of this crisis. They are the people paying the price while governments and diplomats play their long game. Their suffering is a reminder that in global politics, the human toll is often the first thing sacrificed. Looking ahead, Poland's gamble could become the seed of a new European doctrine. For years, Europe tried to live by a simple rule: trade is trade, politics is politics. but Warsaw shattered that illusion. By linking security and commerce so directly, by saying, if you endanger us, your trains stop, Poland may have set a precedent the rest of the EU can't ignore. That raises a big question. Will Brussels adopt this harder line, or will it remain Poland's unique playbook? If the EU embraces it, Europe would start wielding its market power as a strategic weapon, using access to its consumers not just as an economic tool, but as a shield for its security. That would mark a dramatic break with decades of policy. China, for its part, now faces a dilemma it didn't anticipate. If it leans too heavily on Moscow, it risks losing credibility and markets in Europe, which remain vital for its exports. If it distances itself from Russia, it weakens one of its most important geopolitical partnerships. Beijing will likely try to play both sides, but Poland has forced it into a narrower corner where every choice carries real costs. We may see China intensify its efforts to diversify trade routes, pushing harder on southern corridors through Central Asia, the Middle East, and Turkey, to reduce its dependence on Polish rail lines. At the same time, Beijing may double down on charm offensives in Western Europe, trying to peel Berlin and Paris away from Warsaw's hard stance. For Russia, the situation is just as dangerous. The Kremlin depends on China not only for economic lifelines, but also for political cover. If Beijing begins to view the war as too costly for its own interests, Moscow could find itself more isolated than ever. Pressure from Beijing, even if it stays behind closed doors, might eventually push Putin toward negotiations he doesn't want but can't avoid. Meanwhile, Poland's move is already inspiring whispers among Europe's eastern states. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, all long wary of Moscow, may see Warsaw's defiance as a model. Even countries further south, like Romania or Bulgaria, could reconsider their roles on the continent's front line. The message is simple. You don't need to be a great power to shift Europe's strategy. You just need the will to act. And then there's Washington. The United States has every reason to applaud Poland's stance. By standing up to China and Russia simultaneously, Warsaw has tightened the bond with Washington and strengthened NATO's eastern flank. Quietly, American strategists may encourage Poland to continue setting the pace for Europe, even if that puts it at odds with Berlin or Paris. The world is watching how this plays out. If Poland holds firm, it could reshape the very foundations of Europe's foreign policy, where border states are no longer just buffers, but the architects of security. If China adapts by recalibrating its ties with Moscow, the global balance could tilt. And if Russia feels the squeeze from both East and West, the war in Ukraine may reach an unexpected turning point.